Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The divorce papers hit the mahogany desk with a sound like a gunshot, shattering the suffocating silence of the penthouse, but the man sitting behind the desk didn't even blink. Sign them, Cashin, Julian demanded, his voice trembling not with fear, but with the sheer exhaustion of being loved by a monster. Cashin Blackwood, the alpha CEO of Obsidian Corp and the terrifying predator at the top of the city's food chain, slowly lifted his gaze from his tablet. His eyes, the color of frozen steel, locked onto Julian. He didn't look at the papers. He didn't look at the pin Julian had thrown down. He looked at Julian's neck, bare of any mating mark, and then at his wrists, checking for a pulse he couldn't smell. "You're 10 minutes late for dinner," Cashin said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Julian's chest. "Sit down. Did you hear me?" Julian snapped, leaning over the desk, invading the personal space that terrified entire boardrooms. "I am done. I am done being tracked. I am done with the bodyguards. I am done being a prisoner in a golden cage just because you're paranoid. I'm a beta, Cashin. I'm not some fragile omega going into heat. I don't need your protection." Cashin moved. It was a blur, a sudden shift in air pressure that made Julian's ears pop. In a heartbeat, the leather chair was empty, and Cashin was standing directly in front of him, looming like a cliff face. He reached out, his large hand encompassing the back of Julian's neck, thumb pressing against the pulse point. "You are not an omega," Cashin agreed, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "If you were, I could scent you. I could find you by the pheromones lingering in the air. I would know if you were afraid, or aroused, or in pain from miles away." His grip tightened, not enough to bruise, but enough to ground. "But you are a beta. You are a ghost to my senses, Julian. You walk out that door, and you vanish from my world. And I." Cashin's eyes narrowed, a flash of feral, possessive madness swirling in the gray. "I do not allow my things to vanish." He picked up the divorce papers with his free hand, held them up to Julian's face, and slowly, deliberately, tore them in half. "Go wash your hands," Cashin commanded, dropping the shreds onto the floor. "The chef prepared the risotto you like." The marriage between Julian Vane and Cashin Blackwood was the greatest anomaly in high society. In a world governed by secondary genders, where alphas ruled and omegas were coveted prizes, betas were the background noise. They were the worker bees, the invisible infrastructure of society. They didn't experience ruts or heats. They couldn't bond through scent marks. They were biologically, fundamentally, ordinary. Julian was a brilliant architect, a man of structure and logic. He had met Cashin 3 years ago during the commissioning of the Blackwood Tower. Julian had expected the CEO to be arrogant. That was standard for alphas of his rank, but he hadn't expected the intensity. Cashin hadn't looked at the blueprints. He had looked at Julian. 6 months later, they were married. The tabloids screamed that it was a sham. Why would a prime alpha marry a beta? Asterisk, is he impotent? Is it a tax evasion strategy? Asterisk, no one believed it was love. Sometimes, 3 years in, Julian didn't believe it either. It felt less like love and more like acquisition. Julian washed his hands in the marble bathroom, staring at his reflection. He looked tired. Brown hair, brown eyes, average build. Nothing special. Nothing worth the obsession Cashin poured over him. He touched the sleek black titanium cuff on his wrist. It looked like jewelry, a custom piece from a luxury brand, but Julian knew what it was. A biometric scanner and GPS tracker. If his heart rate spiked too high, Cashin knew. If he left the designated safe zones, Cashin knew. "I can't breathe," Julian whispered to the mirror. He dried his hands and walked back to the dining room. The table was long enough to seat 20, but only 2 settings were laid out at the far end. Cashin was already eating, his posture rigid, radiating an aura of dominance that usually sent lesser men scrambling. Julian sat. The silence was heavy, thick with the unsaid. "I received a commission offer today," Julian said quietly, picking up his fork. Cashin didn't look up from his risotto. "I know. The Seraphim Project in Kyoto. I declined it on your behalf." Julian froze. The fork clattered against the china. You what? "It's too far," Cashin said simply. "And the client, Saito, has a reputation for being handsy with his staff. It's unsafe." I am 30 years old. Julian's voice rose, echoing off the high ceilings. I am a man, Cashin. I'm not a child. I wanted that project. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. You have no right to interfere with my career. I have every right. I am your husband. You're my jailer. Cashin finally looked up. The air in the room grew heavy, the scent of ozone and burnt cedar. Cashin's pheromones, flooding the space. Even as a beta with a dull nose, Julian could feel the pressure, a physical weight pressing on his shoulders, triggering an instinctual flight response. Do not test me tonight, Julian, Cashin warned, his voice grating like stones grinding together. My patience is thin. The board is agitated, stocks are volatile, and having you shriek at me is not aiding my temperament. If I'm such a burden, let me go to Kyoto, Julian challenged, his heart hammering against his ribs. No. Give me one good reason other than your insane paranoia. Cashin stood up, the chair scraping harsh against the floor. He walked around the table, his movements predatory. He stopped behind Julian, leaning down so his lips brushed the shell of Julian's ear. Because you are mine, Cashin breathed. And I don't share. Julian trembled. It was a reaction he hated, the biological submission to a prime alpha's voice. But his mind, his beta logic, rebelled. This wasn't romance. This was ownership. And for the first time in 3 years, Julian decided he was going to break the rules. The plan was reckless, illogical, and dangerous, everything Julian wasn't supposed to be. He knew the architecture of the penthouse better than anyone. He had redesigned the security grid himself a year ago to fix a blind spot. Cashin thought the blind spot was fixed. It wasn't. Julian had left a back door in the coding, a tiny loop in the surveillance feed that replayed the previous 10 minutes of footage. 2 days after the argument, Julian enacted his escape. Cashin was in a high-stakes merger meeting. His security detail was stationed at the elevator and the lobby. Julian waited until the shift change at 2 p.m. He activated the loop. For 10 minutes, the cameras would show him sitting on the couch reading a book. Julian moved fast. He stripped off the tracker cuff, having built a specialized magnetic key for this exact purpose months ago, and left it on the side table. He grabbed a pre-packed bag hidden in the HVAC vent of the guest room, shoved a burner phone into his pocket, and took the service stairs. 30 flights down. His legs burned, his lungs heaved, but the adrenaline was a drug. He exited through the kitchen delivery bay, blending in with the catering staff by wearing a stolen uniform cap. He hailed a taxi 2 blocks away. Airport, he said, his voice shaky. International terminal. He wasn't going to Kyoto. That was the first place Cashin would look. He was going to London, to an old university friend who had a couch and no connections to the corporate world. As the taxi merged onto the highway, Julian looked out the window at the skyline dominated by Blackwood Tower. A strange pang of guilt hit him. He imagined Cashin coming home, finding the cuff on the table. The rage. The panic. He doesn't love you, Julian told himself firmly. Asterisk, he loves possessing you. There is a difference. Asterisk, but as the miles put distance between them, the freedom didn't taste sweet. It tasted like ash. Julian made it to the airport. He made it through security. He was sitting at the gate, clutching his boarding pass, when the overhead announcement chimed. Asterisk, passenger Julian Vane. Please report to the information desk immediately. Asterisk, Julian froze. He pulled his cap lower. He didn't move. Asterisk, passenger Julian Vane. Asterisk, he stood up, intending to head for the bathroom, to hide until boarding began. But as he turned, he saw them. 3 men in dark suits. They weren't airport security. They were Obsidian security. They were moving through the crowd with the ruthless efficiency of sharks, scanning faces. How? How did they find him so fast? The tracker was at home. The phone was a burner. Then it hit him. The credit card. He had used his personal emergency card for the taxi because he didn't have enough cash. A rookie mistake born of panic. Julian turned on his heel and walked briskly in the opposite direction. He needed to get out. He couldn't go back to that cage. If he went back now, Cashin would never let him see the sun again. He saw an exit leading to the parking garage. He pushed through the doors, sprinting now. The concrete air was cold. Mr. Vane, a voice shouted behind him. Julian ran. He scrambled over the hood of a parked sedan, his breath tearing at his throat. He reached the lower level, looking for a taxi, a bus, anything. A black SUV screeched to a halt in front of him, blocking his path. The back door flew open. But it wasn't Cashin who stepped out. It was a man Julian vaguely recognized. Slicked back blonde hair, a cruel smile, wearing a suit that cost more than Julian's education. Victor Sterling, Cashin's biggest rival in the tech sector. An alpha with a reputation for brutality. Well, Sterling drawled, stepping out, flanked by two large bodyguards. The runaway bride. Julian backed up. Stay away from me. Cashin is tearing the city apart looking for you. Sterling laughed, lighting a cigarette. He shut down the grid. He has helicopters in the air. It's quite the spectacle. I always wondered what made the Ice King lose his mind. I expected a rare Omega. Not a plain, boring Beta. Sterling stepped closer, his eyes raking over Julian with disdain. You have no scent. You're nothing. Why does he value you so much? That's none of your business, Julian spat. Let me pass. I don't think I will. You see, if I have you, I have Cashin. He'll sign over his company to get his pet back. Sterling nodded to his guards. Grab him. Julian fought. He wasn't a fighter, but he was desperate. He swung his bag, hitting one guard in the face, and turned to run. The second guard tackled him. Julian's face hit the concrete hard, the taste of copper filling his mouth. Get off me. Julian screamed, thrashing. Sterling chuckled, leaning over him. Pathetic. Cashin needs to be taught a lesson in choosing quality partners. Suddenly, a sound tore through the garage. The roar of an engine pushed to its breaking point. A matte black sports car drifted around the corner at an impossible speed, smoke billowing from the tires. It didn't slow down. It aimed directly for the group. Sterling's guard scrambled. Sterling jumped back with a curse. The car slammed into the SUV, the metal crunching with a deafening screech. Before the wheels even stopped spinning, the driver's side door kicked open. Cashin Blackwood emerged. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a demon dragged up from the ninth circle. His tie was gone, his shirt torn at the collar, his eyes glowing with a terrifying, luminescent violet hue, the sign of an alpha in a murderous rage. Cashin. Julian gasped from the floor. Cashin didn't speak. He moved with a violence that was hard to track. One of Sterling's guards tried to draw a weapon. Cashin broke his arm with a sickening snap before the gun cleared the holster. The second guard rushed him. Cashin caught him by the throat and slammed him into the concrete pillar with enough force to crack the stone. Sterling, usually arrogant, looked terrified. The pheromones rolling off Cashin were thick enough to choke on. Pure, unadulterated dominance and killing intent. Even Julian, the scent-blind Beta, felt the air turn heavy and hot, making it hard to breathe. You touched him, Cashin snarled, his voice distorted, animalistic. He stalked toward Sterling. Now, Cashin, be reasonable. Sterling stammered, backing up. I found him. I was keeping him safe for you. Cashin punched him. It wasn't a cinematic punch. It was a blow meant to destroy. Sterling crumpled, blood spraying the concrete. Cashin grabbed him by the lapels, hauling him up, his fist raised again. Cashin, stop. Julian scrambled up, ignoring his bruised ribs. He grabbed Cashin's arm. The muscle under the suit jacket was hard as iron, vibrating with tension. Cashin, you'll kill him. Stop. Cashin froze. His chest heaved. He slowly turned his head to look at Julian. The violet glow in his eyes faded slightly, returning to the steel gray, but the pupils were blown wide. He dropped Sterling like a sack of garbage. Cashin turned fully to Julian. He looked at the bruise forming on Julian's cheek, the dust on his clothes. His hands were shaking. You left, Cashin whispered. The anger was there, but beneath it was something shattering. You took off the tracker. You vanished. Julian faltered. The fear in Cashin's eyes was raw. It wasn't the fear of losing a possession. It was the fear of a man watching his world end. Cashin stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Julian. It wasn't a hug. It was a collision. He buried his face in Julian's neck, inhaling deeply, frantically, searching for a scent that wasn't there. I couldn't find you. Cashin choked out, his voice wet. The satellites. The cameras. Nothing. You were just gone. It was like you were dead. I thought you were dead. Julian stood there, stunned, surrounded by the wreckage of cars and groaning men. He felt the wetness of tears on his neck. Cashin Blackwood, the man who terrified Wall Street, was shaking in his arms. "I'm here," Julian whispered, his hands hesitantly coming up to grip Cashin's back. "I'm right here." "Don't do that again," Cashin commanded, but it sounded like a plea. "Punish me however you want. Spend my money. Scream at me. But do not hide from me. I cannot survive the silence." The ride back to the penthouse was silent, but the air had changed. The suffocating weight was gone, replaced by a fragile, bruised exhaustion. Cashin refused to let go of Julian's hand. He held it so tight his knuckles were white. When they got home, Cashin didn't lock Julian in a room. He didn't yell. He led Julian to the bathroom, sat him on the edge of the tub, and wet a cloth. "I can do it," Julian said. "Let me," Cashin murmured. He gently wiped the dirt and dried blood from Julian's cheek. His touch was reverent, terrified that Julian might break. "Why?" Julian asked quietly, watching Cashin's intense focus. "Why me?" Sterling was right. "I'm a beta. I can't give you heirs with high genetic markers. I can't soothe your ruts with pheromones. I can't even smell you properly. Why are you so obsessed?" Cashin paused, his hand resting against Julian's jaw. He looked deep into Julian's brown eyes. "Do you know what it's like to be an alpha of my level?" Cashin asked softly. "The world is loud. Pheromones are screaming at me constantly. Fear, lust, anger, submission. It's a cacophony. It never stops. Everyone wants something. Everyone smells like want." He leaned his forehead against Julian's. "But you," Cashin closed his eyes. "You are quiet. When I am with you, the noise stops. You don't submit because of biology. You challenge me because of your spirit. You are the only place in this world where I can rest. You are my silence, Julian. And the thought of losing that silence. The thought of the noise coming back forever." Cashin shuddered. "I tried to lock you up because I was terrified," Cashin admitted, a confession that must have tasted like bile to a man of his pride. "I thought if I built walls high enough, fate couldn't take you away. I forgot that walls keep things out, but they also suffocate what's inside." Julian looked at his husband, really looked at him. He saw the dark circles under his eyes, the lines of stress. He realized the control hadn't been an act of power, it had been an act of weakness. Cashin was drowning, and Julian was his only raft. "No more trackers," Julian said firmly. Cashin flinched, but nodded. "No more trackers. And if I want to take a job, we discuss it. We don't forbid it." Cashin's jaw tightened, his instinct to protect warring with his promise. Finally, he exhaled. "We discuss it. But," Julian added, turning his hand to interlace his fingers with Cashin's, "I won't run again. I didn't realize I was the anchor." Cashin kissed Julian's palm, his lips lingering. "You aren't the anchor, Julian. You are the whole ship." 3 months later, the Kyoto skyline was beautiful at night. Julian stood on the balcony of the hotel suite, looking over the blueprints for the Seraphim project. He had taken the job. The glass door slid open behind him. Cashin stepped out. He had flown in for the weekend, unable to stay away for more than a few days. He wrapped his arms around Julian's waist from behind, resting his chin on Julian's shoulder. He was heavy, warm, and solid. "Saito looked at you too long at dinner," Cashin grumbled, nuzzling Julian's ear. "Saito is 60 years old and happily married." "Cashin," Julian laughed, leaning back into the embrace. "I don't care. I should buy his company and fire him." "Cashin." "Fine. I will simply glare at him until he develops a nervous tic." Julian turned in his arms, smiling up at the alpha who had once terrified him. The possessiveness was still there, it always would be. It was woven into Cashin's DNA. But the fear was gone. The cage was gone. Cashin leaned down, kissing Julian with a slow, searing intensity that made Julian's toes curl. It wasn't a kiss of ownership anymore. It was a kiss of gratitude. "I missed you," Cashin murmured against his lips. "I was only gone for 3 days. 3 days of noise," Cashin corrected. "Welcome back." Julian smiled, pulling Cashin closer. "It's good to be home." And that is how the ordinary beta tamed the monster, not with a whip, but with the simple, quiet power of staying. If you enjoyed seeing Cashin lose his composure for love, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, is overprotectiveness a sign of deep love, or just a lack of trust? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.